Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Ignorant Intellectual on Media. Today, we're going to do another mixed haul because I got way too much stuff. All right, so I sold a bunch of items and got a pretty much a really good amount of money to put into my savings account, and then I went a little bit crazy and went all over the city looking for stuff, pawn shops, everything. Anyways, it's just we got video games, we got LP records, we got books, we got movies, we got comics, and we got a little bit of everything. Except I don't think we got any CDs. There wasn't any CDs. I think the market for CDs is starting to dry up because I'm not finding as many as I used to. Um, all right, but we'll see. All right, so this is going to be a pretty long video, it seems. I'll try to shorten it. I'll edit it as much as possible so that I can keep its length reasonable. But it's probably not. It's still going to be a long video. So buckle up your seats and let's do this. All right, so. All right, let's do the video game first. All right, so first up is the video game. All right, so what I got was Sid Meier's Civilization 6 for the Nintendo Switch. I bought a Switch. If you watch previous videos, I bought a Switch for Christmas for my son and I. I've been slowly buying some games for it. This game here, I used to play it on my PC back in the day, like a decade ago or so, and I had a really good time playing it, so I thought maybe I'd pick it up on Nintendo Switch and see how it is playing the sixth version of it, right? So I have played it and I'm just getting into it. I started the game. I played about an hour and a half into the game. I'm just about to start my second city. If you played Civilization 6, you probably know what I'm talking about. If not, this conversation may be lost on you. But quickly, it is a good game. It's as good as the PC game, but you just got to get a little bit used to the buttons instead of using a mouse to go around and clicking stuff and all that. You're using the two joysticks and the 8 buttons and the 4 buttons on the front and everything else to do the actions that your mouse used to do, right? So there's a bit of a learning curve to it, right? And this doesn't come with that big map. It does come with the Civil Cyclopedia. Is that how you pronounce it? The Encyclopedia of Civilization 6. So, and it does give you hints along the way on what to do. So overall, it's a great game, and I found um, it it was quite serendipitous actually because I was looking at this game and Arachnoid. Have you ever heard of the game Arachnoid? Anyways, if you were around in the 80s, you would have heard of Arachnid or Arachnoid. It was basically a breakout game. I don't know if you know what a breakout game is, but basically it's a ball with a pad and you hit bricks. You know, the original one of that was called a breakout if I remember correctly. But Arachnid is a better version of that where you hit bricks and these powers kind of roll down the screen and like a red L would give you a laser and you'd be able to shoot the bricks above you, and then like a P would be, or an E, a blue E would be elongate, which would make your paddle longer, and so on and so forth. It was quite a fun game. And back in the 80s, I used to play it when I lived in Montreal. Back when, man, if you would have been around in the 80s in Montreal, you would have had a really good time being a young person. It was so much fun. I don't know where I got any of the money for doing it, but um, there was a local, arcade that I would go to, and downtown on St. Catherine Street in Montreal, it was just wall-to-wall arcades that you could go into, like hundreds and hundreds of games, two or three floors of video games. It was quite fun. So um, we would play all different games. But I basically, mastered Arachnoid. Um, I would get to the end on a quarter, right? That was back. There was a transition period between where you would play quarter games. You'd put in a quarter and you'd play, and depending on your skill level, would be how long you would last in the game. So as you got better with the game, the longer you would play on the game. And I could go into an arcade and play things like Frogger, Punch Out, Miss Pac-Man, Karate Fighter. Anyways, a whole bunch of different games. I mastered a lot of them, and I would go in with maybe $2 worth of quarters, and I'd be there for 3 or 4 hours, right? So it was quite fun once you got really good at those games. But it did take a while for you to learn them. So you did pump in a bunch of quarters, and a lot of the arcades, what they would do is once they saw the amount of quarters in the machine started going down, meaning that everybody was getting good at the game, they would take that out and replace it with a different game, right? So then you would have a whole new set of games that you would have to learn. But you could get better at them as you got better. Like Donkey Kong, if you got better at it, you would get better at it and you would last longer. But then what happened was more greed kind of took over in that industry. And what they started doing is started putting out games that you couldn't beat no matter how skilled you were. And basically, or games that would be time oriented, where you would have like 2 minutes of time to play the game. And if you wanted to play it longer, you would have to, put a quarter in, right? And, the fighting games like, Street Fighter and that, where you'd be popping quarters in to fight another opponent or whatever. Anyway, so they were quarter eaters, right? So once arcades changed into that, you saw the beginnings of the end of the arcade game. I mean, home video games killed the arcade, but they kind of shot themselves in the foot as well by making games that you couldn't beat no matter how hard you tried. You'd still have to pop in $8 or $10 worth of quarters just to get to the end of the game, right? Because it would be on a time thing, or especially, time. It would be on a timer kind of thing. You'd play for like 2 minutes, and then it would say to continue play, put in another quarter, that kind of thing. Anyway, but in its heyday, back in the '80s, when you had those, first, second, third generation machines, video games that came out, where there was a skill to it, right? And the more you played it, the better you got. The longer you lasted. Though that was, the zenith or the golden age of video games, right? So then everything came into the house, right? And video games basically died. But anyway, so this game I used to play on my PC, and it's basically very similar to the PC game. Just like I said, you need to get used to all the different buttons that you need to use. And I found it for $10, which is a ridiculous price because I think new it sells for 40 or 50, and I'll put it down here how much it is on Amazon. And um, I mentioned serendipitousness or luckiness because I was talking to another person that had this on Kijiji or Facebook Marketplace, and they wanted um, like $25 for it. So, and then I continued searching for it, and I found a guy like right near where I live, and he wanted 10 for it. So I said, okay, and I went and got it. So that's Civilization 6. It's basically a city building game where you build a city, and then you go out and you harvest the resources around the city, and then you end up having meeting up with other civilizations, and then you're competing to who will become the biggest civilization, right? And you have like historical figures like you could play as Americans, and you'd be Franklin Roosevelt. You could play as Egyptians with Cleopatra and things like that. So basically, it's a turn-based city or civilization building game that you play, right? And I had quite a fun with it. But the greatest of all that type of game was Sim City, and I don't know why. Where's Sim City? Come on, somebody put out a new Sim City game, because that game was friggin'. I mean, I hundreds of hours I played on Sim City. That was an amazing game. But now I try to play even the latest version that came out. I don't know how long ago, like a decade ago. I have no idea how long ago it was, but um, I can't even play it on my PC anymore because it's too retro, right? I have to go figure out how to turn my Windows into an earlier version of Windows just to load it or whatever, right? It ends up becoming way too complicated. Anyways, okay, so that's Civilization. So that's the first thing, man. We got a lot of stuff to go through. So, all right, but this is the only video game out of all of them. All right, so next up, next up is Ernest Buckler's The Mountain in the Valley. Basically, this is a coming of age novel, Canadian novel. All right, coming of age. Talks about a guy named, what was his name? David Kane, I think. Yeah, no, David Canane. Canane? Kane? All right, so he grows up and he wants to become a writer. This takes place in the Annapolis Valley in Nova Scotia, where Buckler was from, and it was published back in 1954. And it's one of the great Canadian novels. Um, Influenced writers like Margaret Lawrence, Alice Munro, and others. So, and as part of the New Canadian Library, I have a whole video on the New Canadian Library that I did that goes through this. This is the most important pub, publication in Canada for Canadian fiction, and it no longer exists really, which is disappointing. But anyways, I went through the video. I went through a whole video on that. If you want to go through my channel, you'll find it. All right, it's basically an introduction to the New Canadian Library. Anyway, so this is the fifth cover that the New Canadian Library has used, and they're beautiful books. They're beautiful covers. All right, if you notice it. And basically, like I said, coming of age story in rural Nova Scotia in the Annapolis Valley. And it's quite a good read. So, like I say with music in Canada, a lot of people just kind of overlook it, especially those south of the border. You have to go south of the border if you want to get the attention of the Americans. So many Canadians that are, known internationally, move to the United States to live in order to, gain that type of popularity. But there are a bunch of Canadian artists that stayed in Canada that aren't as known internationally, but merit your ear, right? Same thing with fiction and literature in Canada. There's a whole slew of great writers in Canada that aren't read outside Canada and aren't read by Canadians a lot of the time. So know your literature. I'm saying to my fellow Canadians, know your literature. Read some literature. Collect the New Canadian Library and read the books in it. You'll be quite impressed. All right. So that's the first book. All right. So Ernest Buckler's The Mountain and the Valley, and it was published in the 50s, 1954, if I remember correctly. All right. All right. Next up is William Gibson's Pattern Recognition, which came out in 2003. And basically, William Gibson is known, he's a Canadian author, but an American author. So he's a Canadian that went south and became, well known. His book Neuromancer is basically one of the greatest science fiction novels of all time. He introduced the world to cyberpunk, right? And that's what that is about. The effects of technology on society and human beings in general. And a lot of his books are that way. This one takes place not in the future, but in the present. And it's basically about a gentleman who has a psychic ability for pattern recognition in things. Anyways, I haven't read the book, so I picked this up because of his name. All right. William Gibson is a really easy sell, and I'm going to probably sell this book. All right. So that's the next one. I have no room to put anything anywhere. There's just so much stuff. I'll squish it in. Let's squish it in here. All right. All right. So next up is Volume 1 and Volume 2 of George Orwell's The Collected Essays, Journalism, and Letters of George Orwell, Volume 1 and Volume 2. George Orwell is mostly known for 1984 and Animal Farm, but his essays and his letters and things like that are extremely interesting as well. And if you notice the shape of these Penguin books, they're old, they're yellowed, and I still pick them up for $2 each. Almost every book that you see here, I will have picked up for $2. All right, so $4, and I know even in this crappy shape, I'm going to be able to sell these quite easily, just because it's George Orwell and his stuff. If you ever want to read early turn of the century writers, George Orwell is one of the best. All right, so that's his essays. Next up is John Steinbeck's Of Mice and Men. All right, I don't know, I may have shown this book in a previous, this is the second copy I've found of it. Basically, it's permabound, right? It's basically what they do with books that they usually bring into schools or libraries. It's got a hardcover so it lasts instead of a paperback, but it's the same thing as the paperback. They just make the cover hard, right? And these are really easy to sell really quickly. All right. So, Of Mice and Men is one of the Americans' greatest, short novels by Steinbeck. I think it's his best work. It basically talks about, Lenny and George. They're poor guys on the road. They work at other people's farms, and they all dream about having a farm of their own where George could raise rabbits. Was it George or Lenny? I always confuse the two. Where Lenny can raise rabbits. So they end up getting on a farm where there was this not too nice of a girl uh, that Lenny ends up petting like a rabbit and accidentally injures and kills her. And then, anyways, it's a really depressing short novel, but it's one of the great short novels in American literature, right? So next up is Thousand Recordings to Hear Before You Die, and I picked this one up to sell because I have a copy of it already, right? So, but I know this is going to sell because they have a whole bunch of different books along the same line as this, 1,000 different places that you should visit before you die, 1,000 movies you should watch before you die, all this theme thing, right? But the best out of all of those is 1,000 recordings that you should listen to before you die, because if you're just starting out listening to music and you want to get a good idea of what music is out there, this book is a really good purchase. All right. It goes through all the different genres of music, from classical music to jazz to rock and roll, to punk, to all the different and garage music, you name it. It goes through all of it and basically gives you 1,000 of them, right? And that's a pretty small list. After you listen to those 1,000 recordings, you have you know, uh, have an expert take on music or anything like that, but you will have opened up an area of culture, and then you'll know where to go to pursue it further. As you listen to things, you're going to listen to some things that you like. You're going to listen to some things that you don't really much like, but this will give you an idea of where to go, and then go from there, right? So once you listen to these 1,000 recordings, you have a pretty good idea of what music is out there and what you'll like and what you won't like, and it's a very good primer, basically, right? It has some of the greatest stuff that's ever been put out, right? So let's go. Train Spotting soundtracks. Huh. Ladies and gentlemen, we are floating in space. There's Dusty in Memphis, one of the great soul albums of all time. Extremely good. Anyway, so you can't go wrong with this. I went through the whole thing myself, all right, and I listened to pretty much almost everything that's in here, right? So probably forgot half of it now because it's been 20 years. When was this published? It's got to have been 20 years ago, 2008. So not 20, so 15 years ago. But like I said, if you want, you know, I want to listen to music, but I don't know where to start, this is a good book to start with. All right, just go through it, try to find the recordings that they have in this and listen to them, and then you'll get a really good understanding of music. All right, next up is the complete Sherlock Holmes collection with Basil Rathbone. Those 30s and 40s black and white movies with Rathbone as Sherlock Holmes. And well, this captures all of them on DVD. All right, it's like 5 DVDs if I remember correctly. Right, it's really nice. They have a Blu-ray version of this as well, but I found this for $3. So I think I have a couple of his Sherlock Holmes movies, but I don't have the whole collection. This has all 14 of them. So if you're looking, a lot of people associate Basil Rathbone with Sherlock Holmes. They're like, can't remember the word I'm trying to think of. They're basically intertwined. So when you think of, certain characters, you can think of a certain actor that does that character. And with Sherlock Holmes, it's Basil Rathbone, right? So I mean, some people may say now it's Robert Downey Jr., but not really, because everybody thinks of him as Iron Man, not really Sherlock Holmes, right? So anyway, so it's like in a book form. I'm going to add this to my collection. I'll have all the Rathbone Sherlock Holmes films, right? All right, so that's that. All right. Next up after that is some DVDs from 2003. It's just called Led Zeppelin. All right, and basically it has two of their concerts. It has Live at the Royal Albert Hall from 1970 and Madison Square Garden in 1973, right? So it has two concerts, although it says Immigrant Song 1972, whatever that means. But anyways, basically it's two concerts on basically on two DVDs, if you can see that. All right, and Led Zeppelin is one of the great hard rock bands of all time, and anytime you get a live concert from them, well, here you get two. Now, like I said in previous videos, I don't really collect concert videos. I'm not a big fan of watching, whether in person or on a DVD or a Blu-ray, a concert from a group, because I find it boring. I don't know why I find it boring, because they're not doing anything. They're basically playing their instruments, and the person's at a microphone and singing. There's nothing going on really. I mean, if you get like a Pink Floyd show, at least there's like, there's lights and everywhere. I mean, it's set up so that you can walk in there stoned or whatever. Not that I ever did, but um, and Pink Floyd's famous for their light shows and everything at their concerts, which gives you a really cool experience, high or not, right? But most of the time when you go see a band, you're seeing them play live, and basically there's not much going on, right? So you have one guy, he's playing his guitar and he's walking around. You have a person with a microphone and they're singing, and a person with the drums and they're drumming, another person with a bass and they're bassing, right? So I don't find it very exciting watching somebody play a musical instrument. I think basically music is an oral medium, not a visual medium, and I don't, I don't understand how crazy people go over, like concert tickets going to see somebody live when all they're doing is, in front of the microphone singing. I mean, some have more of a performance, but most of the time that's what basically is, right? Because, they can't get away from the microphone if they're going to sing, right? Um, so I would rather have the CD of the live concert than actually have to use my eyes to watch it. I'd rather listen to it than watch it, right? So I don't really collect these. I do collect documentaries on bands and on music. Those are some of my favorite documentaries, are documentaries on, the history of music or specific bands. And if they're playing music in it, as an example, maybe somebody's talking about, like let's say Tommy Lee's drumming or whatever from Motley Crue or whatever, and they're doing there's a documentary on Motley Crue, and then they talk about how Tommy Lee drums differently than a lot of other drummers, and then they show his technique kind of idea. Then, or maybe they'll show like a 30-second clip of a song because of something that happened on stage at that time. That's part of the documentary, that kind of thing. Yeah. But to sit down and spend an hour or two watching, them play songs on stage, I would prefer to just listen to it than watch it, because watching it's boring, in my opinion. All right, so that's Led Zeppelin's two live concerts. I'll end up selling that. Next up is Oscar Wilde, The Importance of Being Earnest. This is his best play. He's had a number of plays. He only had one novel, which was, The Picture of Dorian Gray. But he went to jail for his homosexuality. He became popular, and a lot of his stuff is biting and satirical and really fun to read. And The Importance of Being Earnest is one of the reasons for that. So this is a Penguin Plays publication. They're all yellow. Most of them are yellow. All right, and I go through all the great plays in the English language, right? So, and this has The Importance of Being Earnest, but it also has other of his plays. So, like Lady Windermere's Fan, A Woman of No Importance, An Ideal Husband, and Salome, right? So it has 5 of his plays. So I'm just basically going to resell that. Most of the books that I buy to resell, so I can get movies, right? Um, Next up is, probably the greatest mystery or crime writer of all time, and that's Agatha Christie. She's had over 100 books, right? And this is one of her most famous ones, which is Murder on the Orient Express. Came out as a movie like 3 times, actually, I think. There was a movie based on this book, and it's basically, um, what's the name of her? His investigator, Poirot, Poirot. I think it's Poirot, right? So he's on a train traveling in Turkey from Istanbul to wherever, and there's a murder of a of a rich guy on the train, and then they get stuck between the cities, um, and then he's got to solve that murder. Anyways, it's Agatha Christie. The book's going to be good, right? And she sells really well as well. So all right, so that's Agatha Christie's Murder on the Orient Express. Next up is Shout, which was published in 1981. It's basically a Beatles biography, all right, and got pictures in it. It's supposedly one of the definitive biographies of the Beatles, right? So if you're interested in the Beatles, even though they may be your father or grandfather's music, the Beatles are still around. Their music is still here. People are still listening to their music, even though the last album they ever made was in the early 70s. What was it, like 72 or something? Maybe it was even just 1970. Anyways, I'll put it down here or whatever. Um, but nobody's had a greater influence on music than the popularity of the Beatles, and that's basically a biography you can read by them. All right, so next up after that is Peter Sellers and After the Fox. All right, so this is basically a heist comedy, and it's directed by Vittorio Del Sica. All right, and it came out in 1966. At the height of Peter Sellers, his Pink Panthers and The Party was another great film by him, but mostly the Pink Panthers he was known by, like Return of the Pink Panther, The Pink Panther, A Shot in the Dark, all those films from the 60s. With Peter Sellers, he was a comedic genius, right? So he's up there with like Woody Allen when it comes to comedy, right? So um, this basically is about a heist, and I have not seen it yet, so I will watch it. All right. Next up after that is a George Cukor film from 1960, and it's called Heller in Pink Tights, and it stars Sophia Loren, a young Sophia Loren. And basically, what is this about? If I remember correctly, they're like a traveling show. If I remember correctly, they're in a traveling show. The Healy Dramatic Company, a barnstorming 1880s theatrical troupe that spends part of its time emoting on stage and most of its time fending off confrontational townfolk. All right, so they travel around putting on shows, right? So supposedly this is a pretty good film, but I haven't seen it. Next up is I found the next addition to my Fox Studio Classic, which is called The Desk Set, and it is number 18 in it. All right, this came out in 1957. It's a romantic comedy starring Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn. All right, and is directed by Walter Lang. Now, Walter Lang, he's the guy that did The King and I, State Fair. All right, he did romantic comedies and musicals for Fox in the 40s and the 50s. All right, so I can add this one to my ever-growing collection. Now, there's 40 in this set, and I'm up to, I think, 16, 17 of them now. So I'm almost halfway there. All right. Next up after that is The Great Gatsby, 1925, from F. Scott Fitzgerald. It's probably the definitive 1920s book. It's basically about the jazz age, the kind of bit of the debauchery that's going on in the 20s before you ended up having the Depression and, World War I and all that. This is basically takes place in Long Island in the 20s, and it's basically about a friend and his elusive rich friend, um, the Great Gatsby. Gatsby is the guy's name. All right, so uh, it's one of the great 20th century novels. Right. All right. So next up is another edition of my No Fear Shakespeare, and this one is Romeo and Juliet, one of the great um, romantic tragedies that William Shakespeare wrote with the what. Anyways, it's basically the No Fear Shakespeare series of books. They have a whole bunch of his plays, and basically on one side is the play in its original form, and then on the other side is the play translated into modern English, so that if you have difficulty with Shakespeare in English back in those days, back in the 16th and 17th century, at the turn of that, the 1500s turning into the 1600s, that time period, then you have the modern English version of the play. So it makes it really easy to read Shakespeare without having to worry about trying to understand the English of the time, right? All right. So next up is S.E. Hinton's Rumblefish. Now, S.E. Hinton wrote a book called The Outsiders, which is I consider as the greatest um, young adult novel of all time, children's novel of all time. It basically talks about two gangs, the Soses and the Greasers, and how they fight each other, and then one person ends up getting killed, and then anyways, it's a pretty serious book for a young adult. Um, that's why a lot of times it was banned in schools back in the day. But I read all of her books. Basically, she had that one. Then she had Rumblefish. She had That Was Then, This Is Now, and Tex were the four books that kind of centered around the outsiders and that world, where he, she, she takes kind of like a minor character from her previous book and then expands that character in her next book kind of idea, right? And basically all the books are really enjoyable to read, especially if you're a young adult. And it's about being pushed into adulthood before your time, right? So next up after that is one of the greatest children's novels of all time, and that's Charlie and the Chocolate Factory by Roald Dahl. Right, he wrote this one and James and the Giant Peach, probably two of the greatest children's novels of all time. Matilda as well. And basically, this one is it's made into a movie twice so far. One with Gene Wilder and the other one with Johnny Depp, if I remember correctly, right? So, but basically, it tells about a poor boy living with his parents and grandparents in a cold house, and Willy Wonka, who owns a chocolate factory in the city, decides that he's going to bring a bunch of winners inside the chocolate factory to show them the chocolate factory. You just have to find a golden ticket in one of his chocolate bars. So Charlie's grandparents buys him one for his birthday. They all saved up their money to buy one chocolate bar. That's how poor they are. And it just happens that that one chocolate bar has that golden ticket in it, and he gets to go inside the chocolate factory. Now there is a sequel to this, which is Charlie and the I can't remember something. I'll put it here. I'll put the book here. All right. So um, and but I read this as a child, and I read James and the Giant Peach, and I enjoyed both of them immensely. All right. So that's Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Next up is an Ernest Hemingway novel called For Whom the Bell Tolls. All right. And basically, I pick up these ones. These ones are those abacus. No, ab Ar Arcturus publications where you get in the bookstores on the cheap table, right? They'll go for like $6 each, or two for seven, or two for eight, or three for seven, or whatever. And they're all classic fiction novels, right? And I basically pick them up. I usually get them for $1 or two uh, in the thrift stores, and then I'll sell like 10 of them for like $30 or whatever. So individually, they're difficult to sell, but if you put a whole bunch of them and give a reasonable price for them, you can usually make some money off it. Like if I buy this for two and I get 10 of them, and I sell them for 30, it means I made $10 off that sale, right? So sell them for $3 each, right? If you're buying them new in the store, they're usually around 5 or 6. So you sell them for half that if they buy a bunch of them, right? So and then I make $10 or $15 off the sale, right? So this is For Whom the Bell Tolls, which is one of Ernest Hemingway's greatest books. All right, basically it's set in 1937, just after the bombing of Guernica. Guernica, ignorant intellectual. This novel is Hemingway's response to the Spanish Civil War. All right, so all of his stuff is some of the greatest writing of the 20th century, and you can't go wrong with any of it. Any of his books you pick up, you're going to enjoy. All right. So next up after that is Joseph. Uh, let's do a little bit of research on this guy. Okay. So next up is 3 Days Road by Joseph Boyden. Is that how you pronounce his name? Joseph Boyden. He's a Canadian writer, and this is his first and most famous novel. Basically, it's about two Cree men who join the armed forces, Canadian armed forces, to fight in World War One. They volunteer for it, right? And it's the story of those two Cree men, right? Basically, Boyden claims to be of native descent. Um, he's he's Canadian, but I don't know. There's some sort of controversy around it. But most of his stories are about native Canadians, right? So um, this one is, like I said, his most famous book, and it's pretty easy to sell, so that's why I picked it up. Next up is another William Gibson called Count Zero. All right, so this one, basically, a corporate mercenary wakes in a reconstructed body, a beautiful woman by his side. Then Hosaka Corporation reactivates him for a mission more dangerous than the one he's recovering from to get a defective chief of R&D and the biochip he's perfected out intact. But this proves to be of supreme interest to a certain other parties, some of whom aren't remotely human. All right, so it's another kind of like cyberpunk um, book like Neuromancer, and he's basically famous for this. I mean, he's one of the greatest science fiction writers of all time. Gibson is, and he's Canadian, basically. Well, I think they people call him Canadian American, meaning that he was born in Canada but probably lives in the United States and writes out of the United States, right? So, um, but anytime you can come across a Gibson book, pick it up and read it. You'll quite enjoy it. Next up is Jean-Jacques Rousseau's The Basic Political Writings. There's Rousseau. This is put out by Hackett. Looks like Hackett. Yeah, Hackett Publishing. There's Rousseau. There's Locke. There's a group of writers that talk about political philosophy, and Rousseau is one of them. He's French. Then there's two English guys, Hobbes and well, Leviathan and John Locke with his two treatises on government. You have him with his political writings and a bunch of others, but those three are core for political philosophy. If you want to read about what makes the best state, right? They all talk about it. It's quite interesting reading it. Right? Next up after that is Bernard Malamud's The Natural, and this is the book that The Natural, the film, was based off of, starring Robert Redford, which is basically about a guy named Hobbes. What was his first name? Anyway, so he was like a phenom baseball player, and then he gets shot because of his greatness, or whatever. Anyways, it's I haven't read the book, but I have watched the movie, and it's one of my favorite baseball movies of all time. So I thought I'd pick up the book and read it and do a book to movie comparison, and then sell it afterwards. I'm still reading Kiss of the Spider Woman, and it's going slowly because something changed at work, and I I can no longer read as much at work as I used to be able to. I'm busier at work than I was before, so I'm reading Kiss of the Spider Woman more slowly. Right. The next step for that is Edmund Burke's reflection on the revolution in France. Basically, this is he denounces it, right, and then Thomas Paine comes out with a book that denounces Burke's reflection on the revolution in France, because Burke is a crown defender, I guess you could call. He thinks there should be an elite class that runs a country, otherwise everything goes into chaos, right? You can't trust the common people with governance, right? You need an elite group to run it. And so when the revolution in France, which overthrew the monarchy, happened, Burke was a big critic of it, and this is basically why he thinks that, right? Um, it's an extremely interesting read, but you read this one, and then you read the Thomas Paine novel. I can't remember what I'll put it here. The Thomas Paine novel, which is he's an American, and he agrees with the revolution in France. They had the revolution in the United States against the British, and then the French overthrew the monarchy in France. So Thomas Paine ends up writing a book in response to Burke's reflections on the revolution in France. All right, next up after that is The Fall of Gondolin, which is all right. So next up is The Fall of Gondolin by J.R.R. Tolkien. So he had this book, and he had Beren, and I wrote it down so I can Beren and Luthien and the Children of Hurin. So three books that take place during the first period, like the first age of Middle Earth. And like the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit take place, I think, in the third age, isn't it? My Tolkien is kind of rusty, but I think it's in the third age. And the books that I just mentioned are now. This one was, edited by Christopher Tolkien, J.R.R. Tolkien's son, because um, this wasn't published before Tolkien's death. It was published afterwards, right? So these three books, like I said, Baron and Luthien and the Children of Hurin take place during the first age of Middle Earth. All right, so but Tolkien sells well, so I'll resell that. Next up is a Canadian writer, Michael Ondaatje. He's the guy that did The English Patient. That's probably his most famous book, but he did, The Skin of a Lion and others. In this book here, it's called Coming Through Slaughter. So it basically takes place in New Orleans and in the jazz world of New Orleans, right? So it's supposed to be a really good read. Now, you can't go wrong with any of Ondaatje's books. They're all really interesting to read. And like I said, along with like Buckler, right? He's more modern, right? This book came out when did this book came out? 2005. When was this? 1998. But it was first published in the 70s. So it was one of his early novels. All right. So Coming Through Slaughter by Michael Ondaatje. All right. Next up after that are some films. All right. So I got the Blu-ray of When Harry Met Sally. This is my all-time favorite romantic comedy. Billy Crystal just shines in this, and Meg Ryan does too. But Billy Crystal is like, at his comedic best in this film, right? And it's my all-time favorite romantic comedy. I have this on DVD, but I don't have it on Blu-ray. So when I saw it, I picked it up on Blu-ray. So now I'll combine the two into one Blu-ray case. Save some shelf. Next up, I found a Kino Lorber classic of Chuck Norris's Code of Silence. All right, basically he plays a cop. There's lots of shooting and lots of karate in it. And if you like Chuck Norris, this is probably his best film. This is the type of film that I really love Chuck Norris in. But once he started doing all those, missing in action films where it's all about him carrying a big gun and shooting shit rather than kicking people's ass using his karate skills, I kind of lost interest, right? So, but this one, which came out in 1985, he does have a gun on the cover, and he does use a gun because he was a police officer. But there is some fight scenes in it which are really enjoyable. All right, and it's a Kino Lorber classic, studio classic, which is interesting that they have a Chuck Norris film as a studio classic. All right, then after that, I found Alfred Hitchcock's Spellbound, which is kind of like a romantic film by Hitchcock, but it still has that Hitchcock flair to it, right? So, and it's a Criterion collection. All right, I put this upside down. So when you're putting your booklets and you want to keep them good, either put them in a plastic bag to protect them, or just put them in upside down in your cases, because then all the page edges are here, and then the spine is here, and it doesn't damage the spine. But when you put it the opposite way, they kind of flow in, and then the pages get damaged. So it's better to put them in upside down, at least from my experience. All right, so it's only one disc and one small booklet. It's not a huge booklet, but it does have an essay in it. And there's so many extras on this DVD package. Oh, this is number 136 in the collection. It has commentary by Hitchcock scholar Marion Keene, A Nightmare Ordered by Telephone, which is an in-depth illustrated essay on the Salvador Dali designed dream sequence by James Bigwood. Excerpts from the 1973 audio interview with composer Michalos Rosa. Complete 1948 Lux Radio Theater adaptation starring Joseph Cotten and Alida Valli. So you get basically two copies of the movie, right? Essays noted by noted Hitchcock scholars Leonard Leff and Leslie Brill. Hundreds of behind-the-scene photos, the theatrical trailer. So lots of stuff on this. So I found this. For $10. I found this for $6, and I think this was $7.95. I found this for $7.95, and this I found for $23. All right, so I didn't have this one in my collection. So, like I said, I went a bit crazy, and I paid actually more than $20 for a Criterion, right? So, and then I spent $10 on this Kino Lorber Studio Classic. All right, a lot of money that I usually don't spend that way. All right, so next up is we're getting through it. These ones, have we done all of them? No, we haven't. So let's not confuse those with these ones over here. All right, so next up is John Ralston Saul, The Comeback. All right, Ralston Saul and Michael Ignatieff, if you want to read Canadian, current affairs, philosophy, political thought, that kind of idea, Ignatieff and John Ralston Saul are two of the big brains for that kind of writing in Canada, and you can't go wrong with reading either one of those authors, right? So, this is basically a powerful treatise that provides a fresh way to look at Canadian history. All right, so um, it talks about a whole bunch of stuff, and I haven't read it, so but I am going to read it. Let's put that down here. It's slowly blocking the camera, I think. All right, next up is The Hobbit. All right, everybody knows the book The Hobbit. All right, basically about Bilbo Baggins finds a ring that makes him disappear, and he goes and fights a dragon named Smaug. Super interesting stuff. I enjoy that one book better than the Lord of the Rings trilogy books. I enjoyed this probably twice as much as I did the Lord of the Rings books. All right, so next up after that is John Stuart Mill and Jeremy Bentham, Utilitarianism and Other Essays. All right, so this is a Penguin classic, the latest version of it, the black trade paperback. All right, and basically two big names in political philosophy. Utilitarianism means that basically it means whatever is best for the largest amount of people is what you utilize or what you do, even if it's at the detriment of a smaller part of your population, right? And the whole argument on that, John Stuart Mill's utilitarianism is one of the big philosophical writings, political philosophy writings that you should read, right? So right after that is Ulysses S. Grant's personal memoirs, another Penguin classic. All right, Grant was a, what was he? He was a big general, right, in the Civil War, if I remember correctly. Forced with failing health and financial ruin, the Civil War's greatest general and former president wrote his personal memoirs to secure his family's future and won himself a unique place in American letters. So, um, can't go wrong with reading Ulysses S. Grant. All right. So then I found Hot Fuzz for $4. This one, like I have it on DVD, but I don't have it on Blu-ray. So now I have it on Blu-ray, and I can combine the two. Basically, this is um, Edgar Wright's spoof on buddy cop films with Nick Frost and Simon Pegg, and it's part of the Cornette trilogy. I have a hard time pronouncing whatever it is. I'll put it here. The trilogy, which includes Shaun of the Dead and that apocalyptic one. What? This is the end, or the end of the world, or whatever it's called. I can't remember. Anyways, so that's Hot Fuzz. If you haven't watched any of Edgar Wright's films, watch them. Hot Fuzz, anything with Simon Pegg, Nick Frost, those trilogy of films are hilarious. All right, Shaun of the Dead. When I watched that, I was blown away by it because it's funny, but it's also scary at the same time. And Simon Pegg has a magnetism on film, comedic magnetism. It's like yeah, he just has to show his face on film, and he'll start to smile even before he starts doing anything, right? So, all right. So next up is I found this for $10, and it's called Bread, the complete series, 1 to 8. All right, it's a BBC TV show. I know absolutely nothing about it. All right, but I picked it up because in Canada, because we're so inundated with American culture, there's a there's a good amount of population of Canadians that like to watch British TV just as if not as a distraction, as a alternative to watching American television. They'll watch Canadian television, but then they'll try to watch British television just to counter influence that the American culture has on it, or they just enjoy the British humor and the British way of acting and so on and so forth. So, Bread, I have no idea what this is about. So, welcome to Liverpool and to Kelsall Street. This is Margaret Thatcher's Britain, but there's a different Iron Lady in residence here. Meet Nellie Boswell, fearsome matriarch and mother of her faithful brood. Next up is Greek Tragedies, Volume 1. There's other volumes, so this one has Agamemnon, Prometheus Bound, Oedipus the King, Antigone, and Hippolytus, or Hippolytus, right? Um, Basically, it's all the ancient Greek plays from Aristophanes and all those, the birds, all of them. They except these ones are the tragedies. I think they have a section, so I think there's like 2 or 3 volumes of this, um, at least 2 volumes that I know of, and then I think they have who's this? University of Chicago put these out, right? And then there's a group of them for the comedies, um, as well. So I think altogether there's either 4 or 6 books in this collection. Um, but students search out for these books to find for their classes, right? So that's why I picked that one up. Um, Next up is Toni Morrison's greatest book, which is Beloved. All right, and it's basically brand new. I picked it up. I don't even know if I picked it up for $2. I don't even know if anybody actually read it. But it's one of the great American fiction novels by probably the United States' greatest African American writer. All right. This is about a girl named Beloved, staring unflinchingly into the abyss of slavery. This spellbinding novel transforms history into a story as powerful as Exodus and as intimate as a lullaby. Seth, its protagonist, was born a slave and escaped to Ohio, but 18 years later, she is still not free. She has too many memories of Sweet Home, the beautiful farm where so many hideous things happened, and Seth's new home is haunted by the ghost of her baby, who died nameless and whose tombstone is engraved with a single word, beloved. Filled with bitter poetry and suspense, as taut as a rope, Beloved is a towering achievement by Nobel Prize laureate Toni Morrison. All right, I have not read this book, um, but now that I have it, I'm going to. All right, next up is Gorgias by Plato. All right, so Plato's Republic is the best thing for you to read, but he has all these other shorter pieces that star Socrates. He writes as Socrates in it, and this is one of them. All right, this is also put out by Hackett. All right, um, then we have, can I pronounce that guy's name? Boethius, Boethius, The Consolation of Philosophy. All right, philosophy philosophy books are really interesting to read, and I've read a lot of them. This one I read when I was like 27, 28. I read the first philosophy book I ever read was Plato's Republic, and then I went with Aristotle's Politics. But this one came up, this one, and I read it when I read, what was that guy's name? Ah, man, it's been too long. It's been like 30 years. Um, but I read this in my mid to late 20s. And you think I can remember much of it? Not much of it. But the thing about reading, when you read a lot, what happens is things mesh into other things, and well, at least with me, anyways, as I get older, and you confuse one writer with another writer, but what you've read is still in there, right? What you've read is in there, and it has influenced you um, to become a more knowledgeable or better or more rounded or whatever person, right? So even though you may not be able to quote exactly from a book that you've read, you have absorbed the knowledge from that book, and some will strike you more than others. But sometimes you'll forget where you heard some sort of thing that you end up talking about with somebody else, but you just can't remember who was the original person that wrote it, right? So that happens to me a lot. Next up is another Penguin classic. Okay, so here's the newest version of the Penguin classic. See how it has that white line across, and this is usually written in orange. All right, there's a nice image here, and the spine looks like that. All right. Well, the ones that came out before they changed the cover looked like this. All right. So they had a border to them, and then they had a color coding on the like different colors for different disciplines or whatever, different subject matters on here, and it was black as well. Um, so this one came just before this type of Penguin classic. One before looked like this. All right. All right. So this is Hesiod and Theognis. I have not read this. All right. So this is basically poetry, literature, poetry. It's probably an epic poem. Together, these two poets, okay, so you have Hesiod and Theognis. So Hesiod's works and days, Theognis and elegies. Theognis' elegies and Hesiod's Theogony and works and days. So two pieces by Hesiod and one by Theog Theognis. Is that how you pronounce his name? Theognis? Ignorant intellectual, right? So together these two poets offer a superb introduction to the life and thought of archaic Greece. The Hesiod's Theogony is a primitive creation of myth. It contains all the elements of a story, dark forces, sex, and violence, but can only be read as philosophical speculation of a high order, and it soars to religious heights in its hymns. In contrast, his Works and Days, which is the second piece that he has, also included in this volume, is an intriguing combination of agricultural advice, moral maxims, social and political comment, and superstitious lore. Now, Theogenes, or Theogenes, the savage and suspicious author of many short elegiac poems, written some 2 centuries later, that Hesiod ranges from serious theological questioning to satire and intensely personal love lyrics. The reflect and reflects the moods and themes of an aristocratic poet who mourns a changing Greek society. So basically, it's ancient Greek literature, right? So, all right. And then we have Samuel Butler's Erewhon, all right. And I have not read this. This is the 150th anniversary edition. So now you're seeing where I'm collecting a bunch of my money is because most of these books I'm not keeping, I'm reselling. I'm buying them. I get them for a dollar or two. I go searching around and I pick up people's collections, or I go into thrift stores and find books for a buck or two, sometimes three, and then I'll resell them for usually at least twice that, right? And that'll when people buy them off of me, then I have a pool of money that I can pick up the stuff that I want, right? And it doesn't cost me any money, right? So, all right. So, what's up next? So we did Hot Fuzz. All right. So next up is this Penguin Puffin Classics. All right. It's a 4-book on Canadian classic children's literature. All right. So you have Awake and Dreaming, Underground to Canada, Run, and Mama's Gonna Buy You a Mockingbird. 4 classic Canadian children's novels, all in one really nice box set. Now this was selling for $41.96 new, and I picked it up along with The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, which is another Puffin classic, and The Adventures of Tom Sawyer. So the 2 classic Mark Twain novels, um, and then 4 Canadian classic children's novels um, for $15. So I know I can sell this probably for 20. So I'll make my money back in. These 2 for 6, so probably like $32, and I picked them up for 15. So I'll make maybe 15 off of them, right? So if you haven't read Tom Sawyer or Huckleberry Finn, then you're missing out on one of the Americans' greatest writers, 19th century writers, right? Twain is, along with Dickens, have that certain style of writing that it doesn't really matter what they write about. It's just the way that they write that's so enjoyable to read, right? Twain is that way, and so is Dickens, right? So any of Dickens or Twain stuff, you pick it up, I think you'll quite enjoy it, right? So just because of the way that they write, all right. And then I found this at a local bookstore, and it was $10, and I'm going to add it to my modern library collection. All right, it's in really, really nice shape, although it's price clipped. See that there? Um, uh, People price clip a lot of their books that have dust jackets on it. Um, the reason for that is usually people a lot of the times will buy a book as a gift, and they don't want the person who they're giving the gift to know how much they paid for it, right? So what they'll do is they'll take some scissors and they'll clip off the price on the inside cover, inside dust jacket, right? And that's why you'll get when you look at books that are hardcover, you'll see the corners clipped off, because that's usually where the price is. Somewhere up here, you'll see it cut off, or sometimes they'll take a marker, mark out the price or whatever, right? Don't do that if you're giving that book as a gift, all right? Um, when you do that, you significantly devalue the book that you have, all right? So if it has the price on it or it's price clipped, the difference could be more than half of its price, right? So um, something that's in really nice condition, the dust jacket is in really good condition. Maybe let's say you could sell it for $50, but you price clip that dust jacket, it goes down to like, maybe it'll be $10. I mean, maybe it'll be 15 or 20, but usually that price clip really is detrimental to the sale value of the book that you got, right? And if you did it to a first edition, imagine somebody price clipped the first edition of like Moby Dick or The Old Man and the Sea or something, right? So it's best if you're going to give a gift um, as a book, don't price clip it. Don't mark it out with a marker, because that also damages it. If you're going to give it as a gift, you want it to be as valuable as, and so don't worry about what it says on the price. A person already knows how much a book costs in and around. If a person gives me a hardcover, if a person gives me this paperback, I know they spent between like $10 and $15 on it. All right. If somebody gives me this book, I know they probably spent around $10 on it. Right. Most people do. Like a trade paperback is going to be in the $15 to $25 range. A paperback is going to be in the $10 to $15 range. A hardcover is going to be in a $30 range, right? So everybody that buys books or likes reading books knows around what the price of books is. So you price clipping doesn't really do anything. It doesn't hide a price of something. It's people are going to guess what the price is anyways, right? So don't price clip it. Also, if you're going to write a dedication to them, don't write it inside the book. All right. The nicest thing you can do is buy a card and have that card with the book, or you just take a sheet of paper and you put it inside, like you write the dedication to them, and then you just put it in here. You don't glue it in there, you don't tape it in there, you just put it in there like a bookmark, all right? And then you close it and then you give it to them, and your heartfelt sentiment is on a piece of paper, and you don't damage the book by leaving a long writing. A lot of people won't buy a book that has a dedication to another person in it, so it makes the book not worth much, right? Now, you may be thinking, if you're giving that gift, say, well, if they like the book, then they should keep it because it's a gift, not try to resell it. But the thing about books is, same thing about movies, the same thing about most culture, most media, is that you're really only a custodian for it. Do you understand? You're not an owner of it, right? If you buy me a book right now and you spent $30 on it and you price clipped it and you wrote a dedication in it, well, I may have that book 20 years, but after that, I'm dead, and it's going to go down to my descendants, and maybe they have no interest in reading, so maybe they'll sell it. So you just destroyed the price of something that somebody. You understand what I mean? It's. I understand why people do it, but leave a note inside the book and don't price clip the book, because people know how much the book costs already, right? And you just wreck it for the people, the next people that buy it. So this was probably published in the 1930s. I'd have to look, but 1951. All right, so this was put out in 1951, so over 70 years ago this came out. So the original owner that bought this originally does no longer owns this anymore. I own it, right? And the person that gave it to him as a gift price clipped it, right? And now it's not as valuable because of it, right? So, anyways, all right. So anyways, this is the selected poetry and prose of Shelley. All right, so he's one of the great names in literature, right? So uh, it's number 274 in the collection, all right? And I don't have this one, so I picked it up, all right? The cool thing also about the modern library is, if you collect the old version, there is a new version that's kind of like a greenish gray cover, and they're all like hardcover, full-side hardcover books. These ones are small; they're almost like pocketbook size, all right? And they all come with a nice dust jacket. But if you turn the dust jacket over, what you have is, the complete listing of all the books that are in the collection and their numbers, up until the point that the book that it has is published, right? So when people were doing a listing of all the books that are in this library, they referred to these dust jackets a lot, right? So, and it gives you an idea of what books are in the library, and what books to look for and collect if you want to collect the library, right? So this is probably, I don't know, I have there's there's over 800 volumes in this library. I've been collecting it since the 1990s, and I still only have, I don't know, maybe 150 of them. Maybe I'm getting closer to 200. But you know, it's been like 20 something years that I've been collecting them, and like I said, I won't buy them new, and I'm not going to spend a large sum. Like uh, where I bought this one for $10, he had another one that he wanted $25 for, and I went, yeah, I'm not buying. It goes against the whole philosophy of the books, right? Because originally they came out as a way of educating people that aren't rich, because originally books were extremely expensive to buy, right? And so only the rich or the upper class could buy these books and read. The lower classes were basically illiterate. You know what I mean? They may have learned how to read and write, but they didn't read much because books were too expensive. And this was one of the ways of solving that. These books came out and they were extremely inexpensive, right? To the point where most people could afford to buy them. And then they could expose themselves to great literature, philosophy, science and history and all that the books were made for, right? So um, you 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 taking it and then trying to sell it for a large sum of money kind of defeats the purpose of the books, right? So, but anyways, all right, I digress. All right, so that's the selected poetry and prose of Shelley. All right, next up is another Criterion, and this one's new. I got this one as a gift, all right, because I made a whole video about this film. It's my favorite Canadian film of all time, and if you have not seen this film, search it out, find it, watch it, and be impressed. All right, it's directed by Adam McGowan. Came out in 1994. It stars Mia Krishner and some others. Don McKellar, if I remember correctly, is another. Anyways, it it is an extremely good film. All right, and the Criterion Collection were impressed enough to put it in their collection. It is number 1150 in the collection. Now this came out last September, if I remember correctly. Right now we're in January, so it's been about like 3 months since it came out. But I made a video of should I buy this, because I don't buy things new. I only buy them used. But if I was to buy a movie new, this would be the movie that, because I haven't been able to find it in all the years that I've collected films. This has been one of the most difficult films for me to find. I was thinking about the Criterion when Criterion announced that they were going to be adding this to their collection. It got me excited. I'm going, maybe I should buy it. But then I looked at how much it would cost for me to get this film, and I said, yeah, I just can't do it. So I ended up getting it as a gift. I know how much was paid for it, and it was $54. This thing cost, all right, $54. But I didn't spend the $54. So I can you justify spending $50 on one film, even if it's your all-time favorite film, right? Come on, like $50, really? Like, how does anybody stay in business if they have to pay $50 for a film new, right? Anyways, if you're spending $50 on a film, I mean, unless money is no object to you, right? Because you have a lot of it. Imagine if I wanted to create a library of all my favorite films, and I'm spending $50 on each one of those films. It would take me a lifetime, just to get like 500 of them. You know what I mean? I'm exaggerating, but you understand what I'm saying. But I finally got Exotica, and if you haven't seen this film, watch it. It's extremely good. It's don't be surprised if you're a bit confused at the beginning, because basically Adam Agoyan is the director. He created this storyline where there's a few stories going on independent of each other, but you know, since it's one movie, that they have to be related. So you're a bit confused because you're trying to relate the different stories um, together, and you can't do it. But what happens as the film goes along, these stories converge, and then you see how they all relate to each other, right? And it's a beautiful way of doing the film. Tarantino kind of did that, but he did that more with the manipulation of time, where like with Pulp Fiction, some things happen in the film um, before they actually happen if you were to go in a timeline, right? So some things happen before other things, right? Like a perfect example of that is in one scene you'll see John Travolta get killed by Bruce Willis because he was in the toilet taking a shit, and then the next scene you'll see John Travolta alive because that scene happened before that scene, but it occurred after in the film, right? So, anyways, it's the playing of time makes things interesting. It activates something in your brain to make you pay attention, right? So, and this thing, although it's a bit confusing when you first watch it, it's quite satisfying at the end when everything connects together and you go, "Wow, this is a really good film." And a lot of people, what they end up doing is they end up watching it again right after, and then they know the ending, they know how everything is related to each other, and when they watch it, they enjoy it in a whole new way. An extremely good film. Find it and watch it if you can. All right. All right. I'm going to do actually a follow up to that original video that I did on whether I should buy this or not, and go over how this was bought and why it was bought and all that in another video in the future, right? And then what I did was I was in one thrift shop and I found 4 Criterions on DVD. I found Brief Encounter, all right, David Lean's masterpiece, all right. Then Alfred Hitchcock's Notorious, and Wes Anderson's Rushmore, and who did Silence of the Lamb? Silence of the Lambs, Silence of the Jonathan Demme or Demme, all right. Silence of the Lambs. So this number is number 13 in the collection. This is number 65 in the collection. This is number 137 in the collection. This is number 76 in the collection. All right. Um, so I think I have 3 out of 4 of these already. So I'll just sell the 3 that I don't have. And I was talking in a previous video of how more and more of what you're going to be seeing is the boutique Blu-ray, the boutique cinema labels going more and more into movies that were considered at one time mainstream films, right? That were put out by the studios themselves. Usually, like with the Criterion Collection and others, they would put out films that are difficult to find or haven't been put onto DVD or put onto Blu-ray before, and they're the ones that are bringing it to Blu-ray or DVD, right? But what you're seeing a lot is them going into what are considered more mainstream films. So, for example, this is a good example of the Criterion Collection doing that. But now they did that a long time ago, all right? Because what the Criterion Collection would do is basically um, they'll put out a popular mainstream film that they deem worthy, and they know that that film will sell really well, and then they can take the money that they earned off of that film because it sold really well and use it to develop a film that maybe won't sell as well, but is really good, right? So um, Rushmore is another one. All the Wes Anderson, they have like 8 or 9 Wes Anderson films in the collection, and he's a very popular uh, director, so these sell pretty well. So they put out a lot of those ones. Hitchcock always sells, all right. I don't know if you consider him mainstream, as a lot of his films are old, like from the 30s, 40s, and 50s, right? So, and Brief Encounter, David Lean's. So they would put out something like this because they have enough money from something like that or something like that. But what you're going to see in the future is as the studios put out less and less movies because they're putting it more and more into streaming, you're going to see all the boutique cinema labels, the Blue Underground, you know, uh, the Criterions, the Kino Lobers, the Arrow, the Indicator, these um, Eureka, all these, I don't know how many boutique cinema labels there are, but there's more and more every year, it seems. And you're going to see a lot of them putting out really nice editions of mainstream films, right? Less obscure films, but more mainstream films. And what they'll do is, it usually happens when there's a mainstream film that hasn't been put out on Blu-ray yet, so they put it out on Blu-ray, or it hasn't been put out on 4K yet, so they'll put it out on 4K. So their reason for putting it out is it's a popular, so they know that it's going to sell, and they'll put it out on the next level of existence, or whatever the next level from DVD to Blu-ray to 4K, right? So So that's what you're going to see more and more mainstream films go into the into the boutique cinema area and be put out that way. Now, where Arrow usually what Arrow does a lot of the times they'll put out some really nice box sets of films, and you're going to pay through the teeth for them, but at least they're really nice. Come with a booklet, come with a bunch of extra features, maybe a poster, and all that kind of thing. Um, and you'll like it. Like they did that with An American Werewolf in London, which is a mainstream film, right? They did it with some others as well, like Child's Play. I think they did as well, right? So anyway, so a lot of them are doing that, but at least when you buy something from Arrow, you know, you're getting a lot for that large amount of money that you're spending, right? Whereas in, let's say, with something like Kino Lorber, they'll put out a film and it's a bare bones film, right? It's not, I mean, it may have a bunch of extras in it, but, the packaging and everything else on it is just like a normal Blu-ray, really. And there's no real, I mean, other than probably the transfer, they upgraded the transfer and that kind of thing. So that's good as well. And maybe the title, but if it's a mainstream title and it's a Kino Lorber, it's going to cost you twice or three times the amount as it would if it was put out by the studio itself, right? So I'm not a big fan of Kino Lorber, and a lot of the Criterions originally they put out some really nice editions with large booklets and a whole bunch of extras and two sometimes three DVDs or two Blu-rays or whatever, and then they come out with some mainstream films and all you get is basically one disc and an insert, basically. It's not even a booklet, right? And Criterion seems to be doing that a lot, right? So you get one disc, right? So what you're really buying isn't really the booklet, right? It's the upgrade of the actual movie. The movie looks much better as a Criterion than it does as what came before it, right? So anyway, so I found Notorious, like I said, and Rushmore and Silence of the Lambs and Brief Encounter, um, all to add to the Criterion collection if I don't have them. But I think I have three of those four. The one I don't think I have is Notorious. I think I have the other ones. No, I think I have Notorious and I don't have Brief Encounter. All right. So the other three I'll sell and the one I'll add to my collection. Put it up. I'm trying to get up to 500 of them. They're up to almost 1,200 now. So it'll be nice to get. So I have another one and this one as well. So I'm trying to get up to 500. See how quickly I can get up to 500. All right. So all right. So that's that. And the last DVD. Yeah, we're almost done. The last DVD is the Blu-ray DVD copy of Jurassic World in this tin. All right. I found this for $4. All right. So it has the Blu-ray and it has the DVD and these things. Right? And if anything is begging to have a bag for it, is this tin. If you're going to keep this, right? You're going to keep this because it doesn't slide in. It just kind of sits on the top. I'm assuming it was wrapped in plastic, and that's how it came. It was like that, like a display. Like this thing is the display thing holding up this tin, right? But the tin will just fall off, right? So, and this paper will get damaged. So I will put it in a plastic wrap, but because it's not uniform, it's kind of circular. I don't know how well it'll work, but anyways, we'll give it a shot and see what happens. So that's Jurassic World on Blu-ray and DVD. And now the last two things that I have. All right, so next up is Batman: The Return of Bruce Wayne. This is a DC comic. Um, Originally, it was priced $23.99. I found it for $2. All right. And basically, this is six comics in one. Basically, is what it is. All right. So basically, this chronicles Batman: The Return of Bruce Wayne. There was a six-comic limited edition version of this that came out in 2010, and it's written by Grant Morrison. Now, there's a whole bunch of different artists that pen this, artwork or whatever. But basically, this takes place After Batman's fight with Darkseid, and what was it called? Final Crisis. Final Crisis number 6. He gets sent into the distant past, and then Bruce Wayne ends up going through history through 6 comics, fighting in 6 different eras to get back to Gotham of the present day, right? So that's what this is basically. It's all those 6 comics put together in one graphic novel kind of idea, right? So I picked it up. I read the first comic of it, the first book of the 6, and it was interesting enough. Wasn't too exciting. I'm going to read the other ones, but I think I'm probably just going to sell that. I picked it up for 2. And probably sell it for at least half of what it is new. So I'll make a bit of money off that. I'll buy some more movies, right? All right. So that's the comic. Is there anything else that I'm forgetting? Ah, yes. There's two more things, and those are the 2 records I found. All right. So the first one I found was Randy Newman's "Good Old Boys." All right. So this is my favorite Randy Newman album. Just seeing when it actually came out, 1974. All right. Randy Newman. A lot of people know him from the Toy Story film. He did the music for the Toy Story film, but he's been making music for more than 50 years, right? And I think this is his greatest album. It's called Good Old Boys, and it pokes fun at those rural Americans, good old boys, redneck country folk. He makes good-hearted fun about them and their ideas and everything in this album. All right, and a lot of people consider this his best album. I mean, there are some that consider others, but a lot of people return to this album because it's such a good album. All right, and I picked this up. I picked this one up originally. The guy was selling it for $30, and he marked it down to $25. And then I found this one as well in the record bin that he had, which is the Doors Morrison Hotel, the 50th anniversary deluxe edition that has 2 CDs and 1 LP. All right, so there's 2 CDs and an LP in here. It's a numbered limited edition. This one is numbered. It's put out by Rhino. And what number was this? This was numbered 1119. All right, and it's never been opened. Whoever bought it never opened it. All right, so it's basically brand new. The guy wanted $65 for it, but I got this one instead of 30 or 25, and I got this one instead of 65. I got both of them together uh, for $50. So not bad. It was 90 originally, and I got it for 50, so I almost got them for half price. I'm going to add both of these to my collection. I don't think I may have this LP already, but I don't think I do. So the problem is I have so many LPs all over the place that I can't remember sometimes which ones I have. I haven't listed them. Like, you can go on Discogs and you can put up the title of the album that you have, look for the press, you know, the serial number for it, and then you can add it to your collection on excuse me, on Discogs. But I haven't got around to doing that because what happened was I ended up buying this huge collection of films off this gentleman, like 2,000 films, and it took me like 3 or 4 months to go through it all and shelf it and everything. But a lot of it I already had. So probably maybe out of all those 2,000, probably like maybe 200 of them I already had or I was not interested in keeping. And what I did with all of those is I placed them uh, below my TV because that was the only place, in my rec room that I had some room. So I stacked them all below my TV. But what's below my TV is my record collection in um, IKEA puts out this shelving unit that you can buy, drawers for, right? I can't remember. Is it a Calyx? I think it's Calyx is the name of it, right? And I have 8 squares of it, and each one is a pull-out drawer, and inside each of those pull-out drawers are all my albums that I put in there before I end up stacking all those movies in front of it all, right? So after that, anything I've bought, I just put over here for now, right? So the collection is getting bigger and bigger, and I haven't gone through it because I'm slowly selling those ones that I don't want. And uh, as I sell them, the stack gets smaller, But as I buy more stuff, like let's say I buy something let's say the Die Hard collection that has all the Die Hard films, and before I had like all of them individual, then I'll take all the individual ones off the shelf and I'll put the collection, which is much smaller, on the shelf. Then what do I do with these original films? Well, then I stack them over there in front of the TV to resell, right? So I'm slowly getting through these films to resell, but it's a slow process, and it's been probably a good. Well, they've been there for like a year. Wow, it's been a year since that stack. I've gotten through maybe a third of them, sold about a third of them so far. So, but it's been in front of my TV for like a year, so all my records are kind of trapped in behind them, and I don't want to start pulling all them off of to try to get in behind them. So I don't think I bought this one yet. So if I did, then I'll have two copies of it, right? But okay, so Morrison Hotel from the Doors in a nice sealed um, edition from Rhino. It's really beautiful, and Randy Newman's Good Old Boys were the last two things. I don't think there's anything more that I'm forgetting. Am I forgetting anything else? I think that is everything. All right, I think that's everything. So I think we did this pretty quick. So I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, leave a thumbs up. Think about subscribing, and I need to make a thumbnail. So what should I use as a thumbnail? Should I use the Criterion movies? I'm going to use this one. I'll use this one. Maybe I'll use that LP. That's nice, Jim Morrison LP. And I'll do this, and then I'll smile. Hopefully this is in the camera. All right, and this will be the thumbnail I'll grab. All right, so smile. You're on candid camera. Haha. All right, perfect. Okay. All right. So thanks for watching the video. Think about subscribing. I would enjoy that, and leave a thumbs up. Comment below on anything you've seen. If you have any questions or anything, feel free to ask or comment on what I have. What do you think of this comic if you're a comic book collector? Is this a good series of 6 comics? Um, I don't know comics. I haven't collected comics in decades, so getting back into at least finding some and reading them again. But anyways, all right. So you have a great day, and bye for now.